Everybody, and welcome to another customer success office hours. I'm Matt Vandenbeld at VCloudMatt on Twitter. I have Z House with me today with his new Twitter of at VMA to Z. Hey, Z, do you want to say hi? So last week in one of our other streams, we kind of alternate the office hours and kind of a webinar, more presentation based one. This one we try to keep very interactive, very free flowing. We had a question about somebody wanted to see the deployment of HCX components. So Z here has his own lab hooked up to our VMC instance and is able to take us all through that. So we always wanted to make sure that we answered the questions people put there and demonstrate that we are quite interactive. So Z, did you want to take it away and kind of run with the overview? Actually, I think we might have a problem with hearing you, Z. I gotta just adjust some of my audio settings. That's on my end. So I
All
might
right.
need to. Let me just do that. I have changed some audio settings on my end, so this is entirely on me. If we can try testing some words there, Z. See if I can.
Is that any better,
There we
guys?
go. There I go. I think we got it this time. So,
All right.
so maybe if we could do a little bit of a restart there, and
All right.
sorry
So
about that.
that's all right. So restart. So when you first log in, if you've just deployed your SDDC, or maybe if you've had it for a while but you haven't done anything with HCX, so we'll log into your SDDC and click on add-ons. As I was saying, HCX is always going to be active, but we will have to open it up. So there's a different section inside of the Cloud Services portal specifically for that. You click on Open Hybrid Cloud Extension. It'll take you to this page. We can see it in my SDDC. I already have it deployed, so there's an open link, which takes us to the HCX manager in the cloud. So, like I said, if you don't already have it deployed, take maybe 5 to 7 minutes. You can click on the Open HCX link. You will need to open the firewall if you're on an NSXT based SDDC. If you're on an NSXV based SDDC, that firewall rule will automatically be plumbed in. Um, So once you have it open, once it's deployed in the cloud, come over to administration and request a download link. It'll take a minute or two here, and we will get a link to download the on-prem HCX manager. It'll just come in as an OVA. I've already got it downloaded and installed and configured. So, but this is how you would do it. Just click this link here. I think it's let's see, how big is it? I think it's like 3-ish gigs. Oh, 1.8 gigs. So download that, import it into your environment. Cancel this guy real quick. That's really all you need to do on the cloud side of HCX Manager. So once you have the OVA downloaded, come over here, go to your hosting clusters, deploy
And
it.
just while you're doing that, might be worth mentioning that this is completely included, so there's no fee, there's no
Yep,
extra licensing. This is just available for everybody that uses VMware Cloud.
correct. Yeah, so as long as one of the endpoints is VMC, then yes, it is included with VMC, as long as the cloud endpoint. So come over here, HCX. So we deploy our HCX manager. You'll stand it up, but just deploy an OVA, give it an IP address. It will register itself with the web client. We'll get a plugin here. And as of, I think, 2 or maybe 3 updates ago, so there is, before it was Flash only, but there's full feature parity with the H5 client now. Everybody can rejoice. So once you have it set up, then you'll do a site pairing. So just click on new site pairing, register connection. I've already got one here, but just to kind of show you guys what it looks like. So the site URL, that would actually be this guy right here. Username would be cloudadmin@vmc.local. And then your password, and you'd register it. It'll take a second. And then you'll see both of those. So you'll see it from the cloud side. We can see here, this is our local to the cloud version. We can see all of our information here. We can see our remote side. Our versions are, they're not going to match identically, but they should be pretty close, meaning that they're in, they're ultimately the same release. But since we do have a cloud HCX manager and an enterprise HCX manager, they are a little bit different. So we'll see that. And then the next thing you'll be able to do is deploy your interconnect and WAN opt. These two are tied together, so you do not have to deploy the WAN opt appliance, but it will give you deduping compression, especially over time, and if you're doing multiple streams. So if you have the capability, and really it's just it's a resource capability. It does not consume an internal facing IP address. It's all internal communications between these two. So you cannot just deploy the WAN app together. It must go with the interconnect appliance, and then the network service extension for stretch layer 2. So if we go through and deploy this guy, so we're going to give it this is going to be a management network. This can be a standard switch. This can also be a distributed switch for the management component. Let me check that real quick here. So one of the things on the interconnect appliance, what this is going to do, this is going to give you the ability to do vMotions, as well as cold migrations. That's how all this traffic is where it's going to go through. On the vMotion, if you've been following, what would you say, Matt? Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when we started saying that your vMotion network no longer needs to be isolated. Is that a best practice 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah, I think we changed it. Yeah, 2 years ago, 3. I don't know. Time flies on me. So
time does fly when you're having fun.
Yeah.
So if your vMotion network is not routable, then what you'll want to do is you'll want to create an interface on your vMotion network. So that means that we can get away without needing to make network infrastructure changes in your environment. If it is routable like mine, you can just leave this blank.
And so along those lines, though, so we kind of have it shown here is while this is being routed, it's not being transmitted in plain text, as it were, right? This is a secure tunnel that HCX is configuring. It's not
correct,
because that's a lot of people's concerns about the routed vMotion stuff. Is it's not vMotion in and of itself is not inherently
correct. Yeah, with 6.7 we have the ability to do encrypted vMotion. The default is just opportunistic. So if both sides are capable of doing it, otherwise it'll do it in clear text. All right, so there's all the settings for the IX appliance or the interconnect. It was also, sometimes you may hear it referred to as the CGW. I've personally tried to stop doing that, referring it to that, since we have the compute gateway in just native VMC, to try to not get those confused. So here's the only configuration for WAN opt is the bandwidth limit that we want to apply to it. If you leave it blank, no limit, it'll consume as much as it can. I'm going to limit it to 100 megs here. A little review. I'm going to finish. So when you deploy this, you'll notice that I'm on-prem, and I'm also logged in to VMC here. So on the VMC side, there's no, once you've deployed HCX or activated it through here, there's no other configurations to be done. So we deployed the HCX manager. Part of when we initiated the deploy on the enterprise side, when we started deploying the interconnects, that will trigger the deployment of the remote side as well. So I do have, you can see our peers coming up. I do have my virtual centers in hybrid link mode, so that's why we're seeing both of these. We can see the IX that was deployed on-prem, and we can see the IX peer that that's coming in here. So this will take maybe 10 to 15 minutes. We can see, just kind of monitor this here. So we can pause for a little break. Is there any more questions on HCX or anything else that we can
No,
answer while we're waiting for
not
this?
here. But one thing I kind of wanted to cover, and it's kind of, you can kind of see it here. This is kind of shooting from the hip. Is while there is a disaster recovery functionality within HCX, it's not, I don't know how we could term it, a best practice recommendation from us to use that for VMware Cloud. And the reason we say that is not versus, this is not money. Again, I make, Z nor I make any commission off of any of this stuff. But while you could use this for the replication, there's no intelligence behind it, for lack of a better term. There's no automation towards recovery steps that you gain with the SRM functionality of site recovery as a service. So it's,
Yep.
so we do get a lot of questions about that. So Z, you want to throw some more context or
Yeah.
some
So
more
the
impression on
main
that?
thing is, if you're familiar with Site Recovery Manager, there's a lot of features, and some of those features may just kind of take for granted because that a lot of them have been there since day one when Site Recovery was released, like 10 years ago. Um, our protection groups, recovery plans, things like that, the ability to group things, change IP addresses, kind of some orchestration. So when you take those away, you kind of realize how important they are, how useful they are. So from the protection group and recovery plan, we can group VMs, we can control start order, things like that. We can run any types of scripts that we want inside. Maybe we need to, we want to flush DNS or change our DNS servers, or even change IPs, things like that. So
Yeah,
that,
I think IP addresses is one of the bigger ones. And you don't need to do that with site recovery or as a service if you have an L2 extension.
yeah,
So while this is there, again, I think if you're kind of taking DR seriously, I think that the site recovery is a much better product for it.
yeah, and yeah, we're not sure. I know, I've been asked a couple of times on what the, what's the future for both of these. Is site recovery going to be rolled in HCX, or is the disaster recovery portion of HCX going to go away? No idea. It's there. It works. It uses the same underlying vCenter replication technology. Um, yeah, I'm just not sure. If you have one or two VMs, if you just want to test with it, play around with it, I would agree with Matt, that that
So
would
to
be
I
a
mean
good use case HCX. Yeah.
to your statement and to the comment about where's this going. So for this one, I agree. Yes, I'm not exactly sure the development here, but I do know we are spending a lot of development time on the site recovery as a service
Yep.
to increase functionality and scale and all those kinds of things. So yeah, again, if I were to bet on a pony for which one's going to succeed, it would definitely
Yeah.
be the site recovery side of it.
Yeah. And like I said, Site Recovery Manager has been around for a little over 10 years now. I was actually part of the 1.0 beta.
Really, 10 years?
10 years, 2008.
Wow,
So talk
wow,
about
time
time.
does fly.
Talk about time flying when you're having fun. So while we're here, so these are the interconnect. So all the options that we'll see here. The interconnect, we'll see that our appliances are deploying. I'll take these ones are done. Okay, so yeah, we have our standalone host. So we'll talk about that in a second. So let's go back here real quick, touch on this. So administration. There are updates. These updates are not applied automatically, so and they're not required. So you don't want to get too far behind on them. But I believe the release cadence is every other Friday right now. So you don't have to come to this administration tab. If you just come to the dashboard, it should be this Friday because there wasn't one last Friday. There'll just be a little orange banner that'll come up at the top saying that there's an update available. I think there's a link you can click it. It'll take you to the administration. And what'll end up happening is there'll be a little kind of like this, a little drop down on this guy. So this is the local HCX. So again, I'm on my on-prem virtual center, local HCX. We see our remote HCX. So from our on-prem side, we'll need to download it. There'll be a little down arrow here. You can say download or download and upgrade. There's also be a little info button for the release notes. You can read what's been changed or fixed or updated in it.
Just along those lines, we are looking at adding a way that we're going to alert people besides logging into the interface that updates are available, whether that be an email or something. We're working on something.
Good call. Yep. And I keep saying it's over here, but it'll actually be under this available version. Sorry. So you would do that on-prem, and then you would also come back over here to the cloud side. Open HCX should be this portion, and this is the HCX Cloud Manager, HCX Manager in the cloud. So again, local HCX version, since we're in the cloud now, you would have the same type of setup. So these are just reversed from on-prem in the cloud. Same thing, just download and install. Both of these components will sync up. So this is the management plane. If you think of it kind of like NSX, so this is like NSX Manager. So your tunnels that we should have coming up here shortly will not be affected. These guys are not quite up yet.
We had Mr. Kolos sneak in as well, so I just wanted to call out that we saw him sneak in. So
you guys are very, very sneaky.
I got to have my badoom sound effect ready now that Mr. Kolos is in here.
You gotta wait for me to say something funny before you can do that, though.
No, I think that should just be the sound effect whenever you join the channel.
My own
I think I
personal
could
walk-on music, right?
Yeah.
So what'll happen here? So once these appliances deploy, we'll establish, and this is perfect timing because I'm sure Michael can talk more intelligently about this than I can. But so these tunnels will establish. There's no special firewall rules, so is it SSL based, Michael? Since it's going.
So actually, the tunnels are IPsec tunnels. So you don't need to create the firewall rules on the VMC side, but on the on-prem side, you will need to ensure that the appliances that you deploy, the WAN, not the WAN op, the interconnect appliance and the layer 2 extension appliances will need to reach out to the internet on IPsec ports and protocols, which is UDP 500 and 4500. That's you can share the same public IP, so they only will make outbound connections, which makes it a little easier for the firewall point of view. You don't need to create dedicated inbound DNAT, but you do have to have an SNAT rule that will match and allow them access to the internet. You could use the same SNAT IP for all of them. Since they're making outbound connections, that's fine, but they do need to be able to access the internet to reach, well, not necessarily the whole internet, but to reach the IPs. You'll see. I don't know, Ozzy, if you are able to show where you can see the public IPs that they'll reach to, if you have that handy.
Good point. So yeah, and sorry, that's what I was trying to say was that no inbound rules. So the IPs that they would connect to it, and it actually brings up a good point. So I'm going to back up one quick step. So on HCX Manager, there are a couple of public URLs that it needs to access. One is the registration site. So when you deploy the HCX Manager, when you first log into the UI through the plugin in Virtual Center, it'll ask you for the registration key. You can see these. I'm not worried about showing these because these have already been consumed. So you're on the cloud side, you would end up seeing, let's see, where's this? Cloud right here. So these are automatically deployed and consumed when you activate HCX in your SDDC, and then the enterprise. So once you download the HCX Manager, you'll need to create an activation key, and the only option is for HCX Enterprise. And so you'll copy this. It's a one-time use, but in order for those to be used, it does need HCX Manager needs access to. I don't remember the URLs off the top of my head, but there's two of them. There's it's like registration or something like that, or connect.hcx.vmware.com, and then there's a depot URL for downloading updates.
Yeah, one thing I actually want to mention about the depot, the hybridity-depot.vmware.com, is that it's actually delivered through a content delivery service, which means it's highly distributed. So you get really great performance when you download the updates. You'll be able to get, not that they're massive, but they're large enough. You'll be able to download them typically full speed because they're being served from caching servers. But the side effect of that is it means that you do need to allow internet access out to either through a proxy for those updates to the URL, or outbound to essentially the entire web, because they will have multiple IP that will change all the time. So you can't simply do a lookup, see what the IP is, and return and allow that through your firewall. They will essentially resolve a different IP every time they try and go out.
Yeah, thanks very much for bringing that up, Michael, because that is something that we've seen a few times now with multiple customers. Is their internal web proxies. They've been having issues getting to this. It's kind of one of the more common support tickets I would say we have for HCX setup in particular.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why it's a common practice for when you're allowing them directly through a firewall. Firewall won't do DNS lookups and allow a DNS name through. So most firewall admins will just do a manual lookup, see what the IP is, and then say allow that through the firewall, and boom, you're good. Except you're not, because that IP is almost like a one-time use IP.
I probably shouldn't ask this live, but this might boil into an action item I might take. But do we have a list of IPs available that we would use for this, or
not IPs? So I mean, let's see here.
Well, you can't really translate it to a list because it's very dynamic in nature. There are cache points, like content delivery points, at so many different locations that the IPs can change very frequently. It's not feasible to do a list. That's the whole role of DNS, and so that's why they rely on DNS. It's really not. If you're asking that question, then you're not really looking at doing this the right way, unfortunately. So that's why web proxies were developed, so that they can actually do the filtering and provide security on this type of traffic, web traffic. So a firewall is not really the right device to be providing that level of security. You need something that goes a little deeper into the application layer. So either a web proxy or a firewall with web proxy services built in. Some of the firewalls provide that kind of advanced capability. It's just the difference is you can't configure it as a layer 4 firewall rule to a specific IP. You really need to allow that traffic outbound to the to wherever it's going to go. So basically to anywhere, or filter it with your proxy, as he is about to show.
Yep. Yeah. So here you go. So this is the Cloud HCX Manager. This is the Enterprise HCX Manager, the on-prem. So if you do have a proxy to, like I said, HCX Manager does need to go out for the registration, and it's not just a one-time registration. It will do periodic checks. So if you lose that connectivity, I don't recall if it completely breaks or not. But yeah, things are not gonna work. And then also for the updates. So.
One thing I did want to draw attention to on this page as well, so we've seen some issues, is once you configure the proxy, basically all traffic from the HCX Manager is going to go through that proxy. Important to note is that the HCX Manager also is going to make port 443 or web connections to your vCenter, your PSC for single sign-on, potentially your NSX Manager. What's going to happen is if you configure a proxy, it will send all those requests through your proxy as well. So you'll have to do one of two things. You'll have to ensure that your proxy is able to access and process those requests to allow it through to your vCenter, NSX Manager, PSC, and if any other appliances internally, or you'll need to configure those proxy exclusions to basically allow or exclude all of your internal address ranges. And you want to do that for the URLs and the IP addresses. So it's your vCenter and your PSC, and if you're using NSX, then your NSX manager that you want to make sure that if you're pointing to them when you configure them on the other pages in this appliance setup, that if you're pointing to them by the fully qualified domain name, that you include that fully qualified domain name here in the exclusion list, and your internal IPs, just so that the traffic is able to get through. Otherwise, you could end up losing some connectivity when you start enabling your proxy if your proxy isn't able to reach your internal network.
Yep. All right. What were we talking about before I delved off on that? Oh, we were talking about the public IPs, right? So when these these components are stood up, they're, as Michael was saying, they're only going to connect to specific public IPs that are dedicated to your account. So I'm on an NSXT based SDDC, so this may look a little bit different if you have not seen that yet. But the same information applies. So if we click on public IPs, we can see that. So this is going to be HCX Manager, and then our two fleet appliances. So this one here should be connecting to 31. I'm sure we can take a look and figure out where those are connecting. So we can see now our tunnel is up. So at this point, we could actually do a migration. Let's see here. What do I want to do? Let's go ahead and do the layer 2 first. Okay, so we can see, and this is another good thing to note. So it's a single interconnect and WAN ops currently per virtual center. So I believe there's some talk on allowing these to scale in the future. But that would be, so you could have multiple virtual centers. The network extension service is a minimum of 1 per VDS, but you can scale these. We just don't want to double extend our networks. This is a review of the information here for interconnect WAN opt. Let's come down to our extension service.
So Z, just when you're talking about scaling these out and adding additional appliances, one thing we should probably draw attention to here as well is that by default, we allocate 2 public IP addresses for HCX on the cloud side, which is enough to deploy 2 appliances, the one interconnect and one layer 2 extension appliance. The WAN op doesn't actually consume an IP address. It's connected directly to the interconnect, and it just talks only to the interconnect over some internal private IP space. So you don't need to worry about any network configuration for that appliance. But if you do want to scale out the number of layer 2 appliances, for example, if you have networks on multiple DVSs that you want to stretch, you're going to need to request additional IPs from the cloud side, and you can do that by simply opening up a chat window and telling them that you need to deploy multiple layer 2 concentrators, and so they'll help you get set up that way. You want to do that before, because otherwise what happens is it goes and deploys your on-prem appliance, and it tries to deploy the matching pair on the cloud side, and when it allocates an IP for it, it finds it doesn't have one to allocate, and it rolls back your on-prem configuration. You're wondering, why is it rolling back? Everything should be fine.
Yep.
So that's something to be aware of, and as you also mentioned, double extending networks. So this is something you really have to be careful for. Remember, you're stretching a layer 2 network, not a layer 3, not a port group. It's actually a VLAN, unless you're stretching NSX VXLAN networks. The same thing would apply. It's a little easier to see in NSX networks because central management. But if you have a port group on 2 different VDSs that maybe name something different, or maybe even is the same thing, but it's all connected to the same VLAN on your physical network, you only need to extend it once, because it's extending at the VLAN level. So if you say I have 2 different VDSs that are both using the same VLAN, but they're different clusters or something, you don't want to stretch that twice. When you stretch it once, the communication will work, because it's simply a layer 2 VLAN. And if you do stretch it twice, you can end up creating a network loop and consuming all your bandwidth on that link, trying to send the same packets around in circles. So definitely plan carefully, 1 extension per VLAN.
Yep.
in your environment.
Yeah, and then just one thing to note. So I touched on it earlier. So on the layer 2 extension, it does require a distributed switch. So you'll see that that's why my naming scheme is pretty easy to determine, I think. So we have our distributed switch. On the management side, it can be a standard switch. It can be a distributed switch. It could be a VXLAN. But just one thing to note, and like I said, it's per VDS.
So another thing that I've seen, and you guys can maybe comment on this as well. So when you're using this with a direct connect, that uplink MTU will come into account. Is that a correct statement?
I think I'm not sure. I think we're at 1500.
Yeah, so I have seen some customers put that up to 9,000 when using a direct connect.
So the uplink MTU, I think what it'll get here is it'll pick the MTU from your distributed switch uplink. So if you configure jumbo frames in your distributed switch, it will pick it up. But what's important is you want to keep in mind that this traffic is going to go over the internet. Right? It's going to traverse the internet from those public IPs to create that VPN tunnel. So in the internet, the MTU is 1500, and oftentimes it'll end up being a little bit smaller because there's some overhead for various tunneling protocols. So sometimes you know if you have VPN tunnels or some sort of tunnel in your environment, you end up with a little bit less even. So you probably don't ever want to go more than 1500 here. If you have to ask, then you probably don't want to do that. So you might see a number higher, but it's unlikely because I don't even think it allows you to change it. No, it does change it there, but
Well,
so
I think the reason he can't change it is because his uplink is set to 1500. I think if his
I mean, I could limit it. I don't know that I could do.
No, so but if your DVS or VDS or whatever the hell we call it now is 9,000. So I have seen this come up with the customers where that the DVS is set to 9,000. They did have to go in there and put that to 1500. Which
I got you. I got your question.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
So that's why I brought it up, because I have seen it where, a lot of people have default to jumbo frames on their virtual distributed switch, and so in here you would need to take that 9,000 out and put it down to 1500.
Yep, good call. All right, so let's we're gonna we're gonna finish it. So it's gonna go through. It's gonna do the same thing. It's gonna make me go through. So same type of deployment. We'll see it come up. It'll deploy the on-prem side, which will also trigger the peer deployment on the cloud side. Maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then probably 2 to 5 minutes for the tunnel to come up after that. So while we're doing that, we can go through and do just a basic migration. One thing to note currently, sorry, I'm going to find out. So we do not, HCX does not support hardware version 14 currently. That's in the works. I just need to figure out what VM I can use here. And we'll do our VRO appliance. So some of the things to note. So this is going to be going from on-prem to the cloud. If you wanted to move a workload from the cloud to on-prem, hit this reverse migration button here. Give me 1 second so you guys don't have to listen to my dog whine in the background here. Be right back.
We're very animal friendly on this stream as well, so and we do pay attention to whining, which is occasionally a thing.
I wonder, maybe when are we scheduling the deployment of a VMC for dogs?
I don't know.
Do a session on that?
I guess so.
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. Live and unscripted.
I was trying to give Matt some opportunities to do his badumch.
Yeah, I know. That just wasn't worthy of the badumch. That was I don't.
So let's see, what do we do here? Okay, so reverse migration from cloud. So it'll give you just your a different view here. So let's see, we want to, since this VM is powered off, it's going to be a cold migration. So same type of operation if it was just through Virtual Center. You know, if the VM is powered off, do a right-click migrate, be a cold migration. If it's powered on, it would be a vMotion. HCX is gonna detect the same thing. If you have multiples, if you're trying to do more than one of these, if you set this default options up here, it will apply to everything. If you're just doing one, you're gonna have to do it anyway, so it's not a big time savings. But one thing to note, we can keep same thin provision. We can see that this is going to be a bulk, it automatically detected bulk migration, and we can see that this one here is a cold migration since the VM is powered off. And then we're going to do a network mapping. So if we have, once our L2C deploys and we extend a network, it will automatically map. We'll detect what network we are on-prem, and it will automatically select this.
So while you're in this interface here, Z, one of the things that comes up a lot is the vSphere replicated, or what do we call it now? Cloud vMotion, the vSphere replicated.
We're going to call it replication assisted vMotion.
Yeah.
RAV.
So this is where you would select that.
Yes. Yep.
So we get that question. I got that question a lot at VMworld about like, well, how do I do that? And it's in this interface that you would select that. Another point that I want to bring up is it's funny because he's moving a VR appliance. So there was, for everybody that's used HCX for a while, what we did used to block quote unquote management workloads from being moved with HCX. So things like VRA or vCenters, and that's something we have now fixed. So you can use HCX to migrate vRealize automation to the cloud if that's something you're interested in doing.
And on the replication assisted vMotion, so that's in preview right now. I do not have that enabled on our SDDC, so I cannot show that. But it's not generally available at this time.
But if you were to have it, it would just literally be in
Yep.
the drop down menu in the.
Exactly. So some of the things we can do here. So this is a cold migration. So really the only thing we can do is we can upgrade virtual hardware. We can trigger that as it goes to the other side. We're just going to leave it for now. So we're just going to map this. We're not going to have any network connectivity because I don't have anything stretched.
So just a quick question. If you go back there, Z, just for because I sometimes get this question too about that retained MAC in there, and I know it's not highlighted here. Now there can be some issues with hitting the retained MAC, potentially mathematically,
Yep.
correct. However, there are some workloads that need to retain that MAC address. I think that there's still some software out there that is licensed on that.
Is there really?
It's been a while since I've run into it, but I'm sure that still exists.
I'm sure there is too.
You know, and in some cases that is some of the workloads that people are moving to VMware on AWS because that's an application that chances are nobody's worked on in years and years and years and years. So it's something to validate when you're doing your kind of remediation and migration planning to identify any of those because you can retain that MAC address when you move it up to the cloud so that it wouldn't break that application potentially.
Yeah. So I think in general, we use that option when you are doing an actual live migration. So if you're vMotioning a VM, you're going to keep that MAC address, and that's because otherwise network connectivity is going to be impacted. It's going to have to all the other devices that are communicating it will need to update their ARP tables. And so in general, we keep that setting. But the important thing to note is that MAC addresses are typically assigned and managed by the vCenter. And when you're doing a migration, you're changing vCenters. So what happens is you're importing a MAC address into a vCenter that didn't assign it, and it doesn't have its ID. And the way vCenter creates MACs is it uses the VMware internal first three octets, and then then it puts the vCenter instance ID. So if the vCenter ID instance ID is the same in the cloud and on-prem, which it could be, because there are only I think we're 64 that we use, then you could, and it is theoretically possible to have a MAC address conflict. But the other thing to note is that what happens is the MAC address is then configured when you get to the cloud. It's configured as statically assigned. And most people, when they build VMs, they're going to have them set to automatic. So it's just something to be aware of, that MAC address is not going to change, and it's not really going to be um, correctly managed by that vCenter. So in general, it doesn't cause any issues, but it's just something to be aware of, that the configuration may be different from what you're expecting.
Yeah.
And if you do have applications that depend upon the MAC address for licensing or other purposes, for permissions or firewall rules or something, then that's something to take into consideration.
Yep.
No, I have personally never seen when retaining a MAC address it bumping into another, but it is mathematically possible.
It is possible.
So
so validation successful. Go ahead and click on finish here. So this guy will queue up. We can see that it's a cold migration, our direction from on-prem to the cloud, the little arrow. Let's come back and take a look at our L2C. Our tunnel is up. It's nice when you do this, when you kind of do something, because when you deploy it and you just keep hitting refresh, it seems like it takes 10 times as long, at least in my experience. It's just the impatience of it. But so we can see that we have everything set up. So once you have your layer 2 extension set up, we need to extend the network. Again, so we can see our VDS or DVS, however you want to call it. And we can see, and like I was saying before, so we can only extend distributed switches. So we have one segment here, 702. Oh. That number is. Yep. Okay. So just the gateway, so we know.
So I just want to explain a little bit about why it's asking for the gateway here and what that means. And that, because some of you are maybe wondering, so well, wait, we're extending the network. Why am I putting the gateway in? This should be layer 2, and that would be correct. The gateway that you're putting in there at this time, it's not actually being used. What it's doing is it's storing it to create, so that when you unstretch the network in the future, what it does is it pre-configures that gateway on the cloud side, so that when you unstretch it, it's there and ready to go, and your VMs can now continue to talk to the same gateway that they're talking to on-prem. And it'll be basically seamless. When the network is unstretched, they'll just start using the gateway in the cloud. So that's why you put it in. It's important to get it right. Just don't make something up there. It will work initially, but then when you go to unstretch the network, it will not work. And that is also one of the key factors of how this layer 2 extension works, is that all your layer 3 traffic is going to go back to your whatever your gateway on your current physical site is. So if your traffic is routing anywhere, going to its default gateway, it's going to come back over this layer 2 extension, go to your router, and then it will determine where it needs to go, even if that destination is back in the cloud. So you have to be careful not to create too much bandwidth between the cloud and on-prem when you're doing layer 2 setup.
And that's why we always bring up that the technology piece of the migration is, I would say, relatively easy. The planning of the migration is where most of your time should be spent.
Yep.
And that's, like we said, moving as many of the applications within one layer 2 is. That's one strategy, right? Is to migrate VLANs, as it were, to try to stop that hairpinning.
Yeah, and I mean the technology is actually pretty good at it, and in most cases you can get away without being overly pedantic. But you do want to watch out for some obvious gotchas. I mean, if you have some applications that need to communicate between each other and are very latency sensitive, you want to keep them together and make sure that they're they're not on different subnets and have to route back on-prem and back to the cloud, because you could end up introducing twice the amount of latency if you have to go back and forth twice. So it also depends on how much latency you have over your connection. If you've got only a couple of milliseconds because your ISP has a good close connection to the AWS site that you're located in, then it may not be as bad. But if you're going over a slower ISP link and it's further away and you start getting up into the 10, 20, 30, 40 millisecond, and then you create scenarios where you're going over that link twice for a connection between devices, now you're starting to look at higher latencies than the application may be able to tolerate.
And to clarify the kind of what we're talking about here, this is kind of particular to utilizing the HCX networking constructs during the migrations. If you were to be using the logical switches created by either NSXE or NSXT, that would not be the case. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, I mean, it's more to do with a extension where you're stretching the same network between two different sites, and that layer 2 extension itself is where you run into some of these challenges. And HCX, it's highly optimized to do this. The WAN optimization comes into play. The appliances are really fine-tuned to help maximize your performance and therefore minimize your risk. But it's not 100%. There are certain cases where you will still have some impact. We can't change the speed of light.
So if you were, though, to create, say, two logical switches within non-HCX, we're kind of getting outside the HCX topic a little bit, but I think it kind of bears some mention, is if you were to create two logical switches with two different layer 2 segments in the VMC interface using NSX logic, the DLR comes into play.
Yes.
So
right.
that traffic wouldn't necessarily go all the way back to your on-prem to talk to that VM in another layer 2 segment, or the same layer 2 segment for that matter.
Absolutely, yeah. And even when you're on a stretched network, like a stretched layer 2 network through HCX, if both VMs are on that same network and they're both in the same site, then it's going to take the traffic's going to take the optimal path. It's not going to go back on-prem and come back. What we're really referring to is situations where you might have two VMs on two different stretched networks, both in your cloud data center and your VMC SDDC, and they want to talk to each other. And what you might not realize is that because they have to be routed, if they're not on the same network, they need to hit the default gateway. That default gateway is on-prem. So what happens is the traffic has to go across to on-prem, hit your router. The router makes a decision where it goes, sends it to the other network, and the other network then has to go back through the network extension appliance and get to the VM back in the SDDC. So you're going back and forth over that wire, a network extension, that's where you start to potentially increase your latency. Those are the types of scenarios. But if you have networks that are routed, when you create, as Matt was talking about, networks that are inside of VMC, that routing happens through the distributed router. Even it doesn't even necessarily have to leave the ESX host, even if the VMs are on different network segments. It knows where they are and it will route them the most efficient path possible.
All right, so I don't have another VM here, so I'm going to stand one up real quick since this is live on here.
Well, you got a tap dance now.
Tap dance.
Yeah.
Well, this is the nice thing about doing 12 things at once, is there's always something to look at. So we can see we're about 43% done. I guess I could have increased my my WAN opt utilization here, but
so one thing about that 42%, maybe we can, or now we're 43, that we can talk about a little bit, is that percentage indicates the total migration process. Within that migration process, there are a few different steps. So the first step is the instantiation of the replication process. It creates the objects on the remote site, gets the placeholders, and goes. And that gets you to about 11%. And then from 11%, it starts replicating the data. And that's moving the actual bytes that are in the disks and the parameters of the VM over to the cloud. And that goes from 11% to 82%. When you hit 82%, that's the magic number, because that means the entire VM data is replicated and is ready to go to actually be cut over. And what's going to happen is it's going to get to 82%, and it's going to sit at 82% until you tell it to actually migrate. So when you set up the migration of the VM, you could set a time window for when to migrate. So I think when you set it up, you probably just told it to go right away.
Yep.
But you can also schedule a time in the future. So what that allows you to do is if you have a number of VMs, say you've got 40 VMs that you want to group together and migrate to get an application environment migrated over, you can set those all up to go, 2 Fridays from now, let's say. You figure you're going to be ready. And that date isn't set in stone. You just give it a placeholder, and that'll queue it up. It'll start all this replication, go through the 11%, and then replicate all the data and get to 82%. And it sits at 82%, and every 15 minutes, it'll do a delta sync. It'll look what's changed, and it'll send that sync over to keep your VM up to date, and it'll stay at 82%. And then if you get to next Wednesday and you decide, oh, you know what, all my VMs are ready, I want to go now, I don't want to wait till Friday, you come in, you can change the schedule on your VM and say migrate now on Wednesday. When it gets to that window on Wednesday that you set up, what it does is it actually, if you're doing a bulk migration, it powers down your VM on-prem, your source VM, it shuts it off, and then it does a final delta sync, make sure that 100% of the changes are replicated so that your data in the cloud is exactly the same as your data on-prem. It moves the original VM into an archive folder, and then it powers up the VM in the cloud. And once it's powered up, your migration is done. And then you have that object, the archive one, that if you need to go back, if something doesn't work, for example, no problem, you just shut off the one in the cloud, or if it didn't start at all, and you just go to the archive folder and you power back your VM, and you're good to go.
And what's that catchy little phrase we have for that migration? Isn't it reboot to cloud?
Yeah, exactly. And that's basically the impact of what you see is your VM is not 100% seamless, but it's simply a reboot. So a lot of people have scheduled reboots anyways that occur of their VMs. You can simply have it so that reboot occurs, and it, instead of rebooting the same VM in your on-site location, it actually powers it up in the cloud, and boom, your migration is done. And with the scheduling tools, you can do a whole bunch of them all at once.
Now that said, is I wouldn't necessarily schedule this reboot with a whole bunch of other application changes you're doing just to mitigate your risk delta for something were to go wrong. It's easier to troubleshoot what it was, but I haven't run into any problems yet with anybody once the migration succeeds to the cloud of getting it up and running in the cloud. So
yeah, and speaking of other changes, there are a couple of options that you may have noticed on the screen where you can create the migrations, where you can actually have it upgrade the VM hardware and upgrade the VM tools version as well, if you're planning on doing that. As Matt mentioned, depending on your migration, you may or may not want to be combining changes, but it does provide the option to make some of those updates for you while you're doing the migration, if that's what you would like to do.
Yep. See here, not quite. This usually goes pretty fast. Not sure why it's taking so long. So you can see this guy. Let's see what else. I was going to show a live migration here if I can get this guy to come up quick. Oh yeah, we have about 6 minutes left. Do we have any questions from the audience?
nothing as of yet. This would be a good time if anybody had any questions for this. Again, you can either ask in the chat or tweet at me or anything like that, and we'll answer it. And like I said before, if you have suggestions, if you're watching this recording or anything, again, just tweet it at vcloudmatt, and we can answer your questions next week as well, if you have any when you're watching the recording. And as you can see, we do this all live. We do it live. So
we are doing it live. Sorry, I wasn't prepared. Yeah, I upgraded most of my VMs to hardware version 14, which broke my HCX demo abilities. And the ones that I have are large, so I was trying to create a tiny one here so that we could, I don't this is taking so long. Anyway, so this guy might finish in the next 5 minutes or so. Highly doubtful. So we can do a cold migration. You know what we could do. Not that this is going to actually work. So let's do migrate. So here's our VM we're doing right now. So here you can see we have some additional options. So this is where we could actually select bulk migration or vMotion. We'll do a vMotion here since our network's extended. Loads. And as I was saying before, we can see that so this is the segment that it's on-prem, our port group, and we can see that it's extended. So it's automatically selected our extended network. So it's automatically going to retain the MAC, as Michael was saying. It's doing a vMotion, so we're not going to have any changes on that. Same thing, upgrade the virtual hardware, upgrade the virtual tools, or VMware tools. I'll leave it. It's probably going to complain. So it is throwing a warning here saying that we do have a migration that's in process. We can just go ahead and continue.
And just because there's two native Canadians in here, it's actually in process. Yes, just to clarify for you.
So actually, look, so this did finish, and as Michael pointed out, so I did not select a maintenance window, so it's going to go ahead and do this. It's going to move it as soon as it's done. So if we had selected a maintenance window, I can show that here since I've kind of been glancing over it. Scheduled failover. So if you don't select anything, or you can say, hey, I want to do it the 20th, between the 20th and the 21st, whatever that time window looks like. It can be on the same day. It could be just an hour window, 30-minute window, anything like that. So as long as the migration is ready to go, so it'll go to 82% and it'll just sit there. So as long as it migrates all the data for that VM by that maintenance window, it'll go ahead and automatically do the failover. If it does not outside of the maintenance window, does it fail it, or does it continue replicating it? Does it just sit there? I don't recall.
It fails if the replication hasn't completed by the time the maintenance window is over, and the maintenance window is a window, right? So it's a range. But if it doesn't complete that, then it does fail the migration. You need to start over again. So you want to make sure that if you're giving it a window, you don't take a 4 terabyte VM and tell it to give it a window of an hour away, for example.
Yep. So I was trying to migrate this VM here, so that's probably why our installer died out, but we'll see what it looks like when it gets to the other side. So same thing. So we can see here the direction. We can see this one here is a vMotion. We can see this guy here. And interesting. It took 16 minutes. It's not too bad considering I'm just on a home cable connection. I can see that our VM is moving. So this guy here should go pretty quick. There's not a lot of data in it.
But this does demonstrate that you do not need a super high speed link between your on premises and VMC to facilitate this technology.
Yeah. So let's see here. So this is our cloud side. So we are in hybrid link mode, so I can see my on-prem and this guy. So here's our appliance, our VR774 appliance. And if we go back, we'll just do it through here. Oh, it does unregistered. It's just on the disk, right? Is that what it is?
Yeah, it moves it to an archive folder. Yeah, I think it's migrated VMs or something like that. You should still be able to see it in your vCenter.
Oops. It's not there. Did they change it? Interesting.
No, I
Look
think
at that. It's live. No. I had a 7.4 and a 7.5 appliance. It's no longer.
yeah, I think it moves it to a subfolder.
Oh, you know what? No, it was a cold migration. That's why it did it.
Oh,
It wasn't a bulk migration. So another good point. Look at that. We're all kinds of things are coming out here. So cold migration is going to move the VM from on-prem to the cloud, or vice versa, from the cloud to on-prem, and it's not going to leave a copy behind. If you do a bulk migration will leave a copy behind.
right. And so just to add why we're so expectant of that is that bulk migration is the typical method that most customers will use when they're moving their data center or applications to the cloud, simply because the other options are all real time and they work fine if you're doing 1 or 2 VMs, but they're all serial. So you're going to do one vMotion or one cold migration basically at a time. Whereas bulk migration, you set it all up in advance, and then you can migrate a whole bunch of VMs. We don't recommend doing hundreds, but 20, 30, 40 VMs at a time are typically reasonable amounts, and that usually is enough to let you do an entire application or a couple of applications grouped together all at the same time, because you get the data pre-replicated. And that's one difference. When you're doing a vMotion on-prem, you're talking about really high-speed local area networks, you can get 20, 40, 100 gigabits. But over to the cloud, most people don't have that kind of bandwidth. Usually you'll have, say, a gigabit internet connection, but it may be shared with other workloads. And in addition, you have higher latency, which will slow things down versus a LAN going over the internet. So that's usually an easier way to migrate. You're going to just set it up, give yourself a week or two, depending on the size of your VMs and your traffic on your link and your link size. And once everything's there, now you could migrate within a few minutes all of your VMs. Whereas even on-prem, you couldn't migrate the data because you're actually copying data. You're not just changing the host that they're running on. Even on-prem, that moving that amount of data is going to take a significant amount of time. So this allows you to preload all that work and then just focus on the cutover.
Yep. So this is I don't know, is this it's kind of a successful failure here. So it's obviously not an operating system that moved, but we still have the same screen, so we can see our VM just running in our SDDC and VMware Cloud and AWS, and we have the same thing, right? So we vMotioned it from one side to the other. We can see here it took about 5 minutes. We are at the top of the hour, so I'm assuming we're pretty much done here. But I'll just show you the reverse migration real quick.
Yeah, we are a little bit into overtime, but that's fine.
A little OT. So same thing. Select this. We can see here we do have the retained MAC coming back. We can see that our networks, again, are mapped automatically since we're on an extended network. We see this is and then here we have the option between bulk migration and vMotion. So if we do a vMotion, it's going to do it instantly. No retained MAC. vMotion, and then the purple box for reverse, which also matches the arrow. So it's on its way back, and we'll have the same our console timeout, but this is the on-prem one, or sorry, the cloud one, and it'll come back with the in the same state. So show connectivity and stuff like that. We have done, I think we've done a couple in the past. I think it's about 6 to 7 pings that it'll drop, moving from, at least when I've tested it. Like I said, in my lab is just consumer Comcast connection. So when I move those, 6 to 10. But it's pretty impressive to watch.
Your results may vary is the safe thing to say there, I think.
Yes, your results may vary.
Your mileage may vary there. So, but yeah, I think that's good enough for today. I really appreciate Z jumping in kind of last minute. I just kind of put this idea up this morning, and he jumped right in, and I really do appreciate that. And thank you, Michael, again for jumping in and adding your knowledge. Not a lot of dad jokes today. Somewhat disappointed, but Perhaps we'll have the dad joke hour at some later point here. But I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in and watching. This video will be available on YouTube as well, which is accessible on the dashboard at the bottom of the page. You can click the link there. Subscribe. Hopefully, if enough people subscribe to the YouTube, we can actually get a better link to click on. YouTube has added it needs 50 or 20 subscriptions now to have a better short name than the random set of letters that is currently. So we'll work on that. But yeah, I appreciate everybody coming out. Next week is still a topic pending that will be at, I want to say it's going to be at the same time next week, or it might be the APJ one, which we moved to 6 o'clock. I think it actually is the one where we moved to 6 o'clock. And so keep an eye on the events page here. We'll put up what our topic is going to be. It's on my blog at vcloudmat.com if you want to check out the schedule of what's coming up. I will be at VMworld Europe in about a month. I don't think Z or Michael have the opportunity to go, unfortunately. But I'll be there, as will a lot of our other team members. But again, like I said, I appreciate the time, Z. I appreciate everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.